Hello everyone, this is EB the Original Master, and I am back again with another SpongeBob review. So today I saw the new episode, Cave Dwelling Sponge and the Clam Whisperer from Season 11, and I will be giving you guys my review of this episode right now. So, Cave Dwelling Sponge was actually a pretty unique episode. Instead of physically reviewing everything that I saw in this episode, I'm gonna give you some highlights of this episode. So technically, the beginning of the episode, SpongeBob and Patrick was doing a morning nature walk, and Patrick was sleepy, of course, because he's not a morning person and he would rather go home and sleep during the morning. So SpongeBob encourages Patrick that it's okay for him to work out and get some exercises in the morning by doing a nature walk. So they go inside of a cave, and then they notice the scenery of the cave. So the cave had all these ice particles in it. In fact, it was like a giant ice mirror. And then Patrick was being very stupid, so he stuck his tongue against the ice, and then he got his tongue stuck in it. And I thought that wasn't pretty funny. That wasn't actually funny at all. It was just very dumb. So SpongeBob then pulls out a cup of hot chocolate, pours it on Patrick's tongue, and then Patrick freaks out because the hot chocolate was burning his tongue. So SpongeBob and Patrick then leaves the cave, and then inside the cave where SpongeBob poured the hot chocolate at, the ice particles, is where the cave sponge came out. So the cave sponge is actually obsessed with SpongeBob's shoes throughout this entire episode. And now moving on to the highlights. So SpongeBob arrives home from his morning nature walk, and then he realized that his backpack that he was carrying was a little bit heavy, and that's where the cave sponge was actually in when he admired SpongeBob's squeaky shoes. The cave sponge comes out of the backpack, sees Gary, freaks Gary out, destroys half of SpongeBob's house, and then while SpongeBob is getting ready for work, the cave sponge accidentally got into the work business too by going to SpongeBob's clothing room. So the cave sponge follows SpongeBob to work, admiring his shoes, saying "squeaky, squeaky." That was his catchphrase of this episode. Destroying parts of the town. He destroyed a fountain, a mailbox, some fences, started destroying houses. And then when SpongeBob got to the Krusty Krab, he was framed because everyone thought that SpongeBob, the real SpongeBob, destroyed all the property where it was just the cave SpongeBob. So SpongeBob got framed, he got thrown into prison, and then that's where the highlights of this episode began, when the cave sponge just started causing havoc in the Krusty Krab by destroying everything. So Mr. Krabs and Squidward notices that the cave sponge is causing havoc in the restaurant, and SpongeBob is the only one who can communicate with them. So while SpongeBob is in prison in the city hall, the cave sponge arrives, and SpongeBob is the only one who can communicate with this cave sponge. So SpongeBob and the cave sponge are on top of the city hall, while SpongeBob is greeting him by saying his name. So the cave sponge said "Spongy, Spongy," punches SpongeBob in the face, and then SpongeBob and the cave sponge had a musical number while dancing on top of the city hall, and that was actually a pretty hilarious scene. So after the dance off, the cave sponge takes SpongeBob's squeaky shoes, and then he then apologizes to the cops about what happened to the city hall, which was destroyed by the cave SpongeBob. And so Perch Perkins was in this episode reporting the news about the cave sponge causing havoc, and broke the fourth wall by saying "this episode," which was actually a pretty hilarious gag. And that was the and sorry about that, you guys. So the episode ends with the cave sponge smashing the camera with a club, ending Cave Dwelling Sponge. Cave Dwelling Sponge was actually a pretty good episode. It had some really good humor of the cave SpongeBob. The jokes were actually pretty good. I'll give this episode a 8 out of 10. Very good episode. I actually enjoyed Cave Dwelling Sponge a lot. Now let's move on to the Clam Whisperer, its sister episode. No offense, you guys, I really did not like the Clam Whisperer. This episode was actually not that great. So basically these clams are migrating from their winter climate, climate area where they were from, and they need to find a place for them to keep warm from the harsh winter's cold. So SpongeBob and Patrick was doing clam watching from their binoculars, and Patrick then appears again in this episode for no apparent reason. Patrick, he wasn't part of the plot in Cave Dwelling Sponge, but he was just there at the beginning, and then he was never brought up again. So Patrick was in this episode again in the Clam Whisperer, and none of his moments were funny. Patrick's moments were so dumb, it was not funny at the slightest to see how stupid Patrick was in this episode. He was very unlikable, he was very dumb, and I'm so glad he wasn't part of this plot. He wasn't part of the plot of this episode. So basically, these clams are obsessed with Krabby Patties, basically. So they keep stealing people's food, keeps eating their food and whatnot. And nothing in this episode really got me laughing out loud. I mean, the clams did pooped all over Squidward's house, and then Squidward accidentally got pooped on from the clams. They had to take a bath. But other than that, this episode really wasn't that funny. All it was the clams just stealing people's food and SpongeBob trying to run them out of town. Nothing humorous occurred in this episode. Again, they pretty much reused the same characters from Cave Dwelling Sponge. They used Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, Patrick, Mr. Squidward. They used those characters again. Like they were really running out of character selections from Cave Dwelling Sponge and the Clam Whisperer. But the Clam Whisperer wasn't as great as Cave Dwelling Sponge though. So yes, the clams then causes havoc by stealing people's food, and then Mr. Krabs' greediness returns in this episode, where every time Mr. Krabs made an insult to the clams spitted out pearls, and which Mr. Krabs uses to make profit out of. It's almost like Mr. Krabs' behavior from Out of the Picture from season 10. I mean, it's ridiculous about the fact that Mr. Krabs is keep obsessing over greed of stuff. I mean, he's always greedy, and that's what I really don't like about Mr. Krabs' character. So yeah, so cut to the case, the episode ends with SpongeBob transforming into one of the clams to migrate them back to their correct locations. And so the episode ends with Squidward cleaning up his house from the clam feces, and then the SpongeBob. Sorry, let me rephrase that again. So the ending of the Clam Whisperer was Squidward cleaning up his house from the clam poop. I said snail. I don't know. You know what? Rephrase this one more time. Take it nice and easy. The ending of the Clam Whisperer has Squidward cleaning up the clam poop. SpongeBob then returns back to his home. Squidward then finds out that he thinks that SpongeBob was the clam. SpongeBob convinces that it was just him. Squidward then falls into Patrick's saliva that he was drooling on from his sleep, like at the beginning of the episode, which had no purpose whatsoever. And so SpongeBob then sleeps in a nest at the ending of the Clam Whisperer. The Clam Whisperer was just meh. I'm sorry, you guys. The Clam Whisperer was not a good episode at all. I mean, there were some good moments in it with how the characters interacted. But yeah, it was just a meh episode. It wasn't that funny at all. So I have to give this episode a 6 out of 10, while Cave Dwelling Sponge gets an 8. Oh yeah, another thing that I want to talk about was another thing that I want to discuss about Cave Dwelling Sponge was the blender scene when SpongeBob was mixing up a milkshake, and then Mr. Krabs came from the window, or from the little drive-through window thing, and started screaming out SpongeBob's name. That was actually pretty hilarious to see how cartoony the gags were in that episode. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed my review for Cave Dwelling Sponge and the Clam Whisperer. These episodes were actually pretty good. Well, the Cave Dwelling Sponge was, not the Clam Whisperer. And I hated the fact that they used skipping the school for both the Cave Dwelling Sponge and the Clam Whisperer. And they also did Kula Ghibli. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name of the song. That was the title card music for the Clam Whisperer. And for Cave Dwelling Sponge was SpongeBob's history song. So with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.